Hey, so I want to speak a bit about the Canadian federal election. The results are just coming through. I knew the election was going on around this time, but I hadn't really clicked that it was tonight. Um, Firstly, I need to admit that I'm not as up to date on Canadian politics as I would like to be, but I do consider Canada a great country. It's a major world power. Um, so I am somewhat interested. Um, it looks like Justin Trudeau of the Liberal Party has won. The results as they are at the moment, there's still a few seats to declare. The results as they are right now is the Liberal Party has 177, Conservatives have 96, the New Democratic Party 32, Bloc Québécois 9, and the Green Party just 1. So it looks like Justin Trudeau has a mandate to be the new Prime Minister. 170 needed for a majority. Um, so that means that Stephen Harper will be stepping down. A quick word about Harper, then a quick word about Justin Trudeau, then some of my general thoughts. Harper has been in office since 2006. He's currently Canada's sixth longest serving Prime Minister at 9 years, 256 days, between John Grisham and Brian Mulroney. And the longest serving, of course, was William Lyon Mackenzie King, who was in office for some 21 years, 154 days, though not in a continuous period. Um, Other long-serving Prime Ministers in Canada, Sir John A. Macdonald, Pierre Trudeau, Sir Wilfrid Laurier, and I've already mentioned John Grisham. The shortest-serving Canadian Prime Minister so far is Sir Charles Tupper, who was Prime Minister for a mere 68 days in 1896. Um, okay, so Stephen Harper, he's a Conservative, so that's not what I am. I'm a centrist, but I'm not a Conservative, so I would imagine there's a lot of domestic policies I would take issue with Harper on, much the way I do with David Cameron. Um, I was going to say he's Canada's David Cameron, but it might be more accurate to say Cameron is Britain's Stephen Harper, since Harper has been in office longer. Um, I've heard some on the Canadian left even call him Canada's George Bush. So he's a controversial figure. I think he will be remembered as a controversial Prime Minister. He's been quite hawkish. He's committed Canadian troops, of course, to Afghanistan, which was a controversial decision. I still believe in incidentally that the intervention in Afghanistan was more justified than the intervention in Iraq. That came at a huge cost, of course. Over 150 Canadian troops were killed. Canada's deadliest foreign engagement since World War II. So it's understandable that it was so controversial. Um, he provokes strong opinions. Conservatives seem to have a lot of respect for him, but the Canadian left seem to hate his guts. So I suppose that sounds almost like a Canadian Thatcher. Not quite the same world impact, but nevertheless, he has been in office for 9 years, so I'm sure he's had some. I think it would be fair to say he's had quite a big influence in Canada. A lot of young Canadians who are growing up in this generation will remember Harper for good or bad. Um, I can't really say much more about Harper because, honestly speaking, I don't know enough about him personally or his policies to comment in great detail. Um, Certainly, I would imagine his views on welfare and so on would be similar to David Cameron, so that's an area I probably wouldn't agree with him on. Um, he did make a controversial decision on the Niqab. That's something I'll bring up in a minute. Okay, so on to yeah, so just a quick overview. I don't know enough about the Canadian Conservatives, but I'd imagine they're like the British Conservatives, in which case I wouldn't have a great deal of time for them. But I'm not in Canada and I don't know enough about the domestic situation to really comment in great detail. Um, I think that history will judge that the decision to intervene in Afghanistan was the right decision. It's not popular right now, but in retrospect, I can't see what other choice the international community had, and I think that had much stronger mandate than intervention in Iraq. Um, okay, Justin Trudeau. I don't know a great deal about him. I know he comes from a political family. Pierre Trudeau, of course, was very popular prime minister in the 60s. I believe Pierre was his father. Like every Canadian prime minister, he's multilingual, bilingual, I should say. I really don't know a great deal about him. He's only 43. Harper's currently 56. Justin Trudeau's only 43. I don't know if that makes him Canada's youngest prime minister. I have a feeling there may have been younger people in the office, but he would certainly be among the youngest. Um, he's good looking. He seems to be a good communicator. Um, other than that, I don't really know a great deal. He does seem to be pretty much on the left. Incidentally, I don't know anything about Brian Mulcair, so I can't say much about that. Again, I emphasize I'm not quite up to scratch in my Canadian politics. Um, yeah, so Justin Trudeau, will he be as popular as his father? That remains to be seen. Can't really say a great deal. I will say one thing though, and it's referring to the Niqab issue. Apparently, he got into quite a verbal attack on Harper over this issue. Now, like I say, I'm not a conservative. I regard myself as being centrist and on the centre left on many issues. One area where I do think Harper was right, and his government was right, was to take a hard line on the niqab. And I want to explain why I take this position. Um, I'm well aware that Canada prides itself on multiculturalism. Um, Arguably more than any other Western country, it prides itself on multiculturalism. There's even a memorial, I believe, in Toronto to multiculturalism. That in itself is not necessarily a bad thing. It shows tolerance, it shows diversity. In itself, that's not necessarily a bad thing. But I do think there's a naivety to the left, and this is true not just in Canada but in a lot of Western countries. There is a naivety to blind tolerance. What I mean by that is just blindly accepting anything. Now, I don't know exactly the situation in Canada regarding Muslim women, but in Britain, a very, very, very small number of Muslim women wear the niqab, and it is very important that we differentiate between the niqab and the hijab. Huge difference. Huge, huge difference. The hijab I've got no problem with because there's no communication barrier. Niqab is a communication barrier. That's issue number one. Issue number two, it is an obvious statement we're choosing to be different. To me, it is an attack on the principle of integration. It is saying we're going to be different, we're not going to adapt to Western culture. And then the fact of the matter is, in Western culture, communication is essential. Seeing someone's face when you communicate with them is a basic thing. So I find it rather bemusing that Mr. Trudeau and the Canadian left have been so harsh on Harper over this. Strikes me as a bit hypocritical, as presumably they would be the first to preach about women's rights. Um, like I say, in the situation in Britain is only a minority of Muslim women wear it. And I suspect that not every Canadian Muslim is blindly supporting the niqab. I'd be very surprised if Canada's, as I understand it, 1 million Muslim citizens. Now, I would be surprised if they were all hardcore niqab supporters. So for Justin Trudeau to say this is an attack on Canada's multiculturalism and Islamophobic strikes me as being very, that's the limited knowledge I have of Justin Trudeau, and it's not a good impression because it strikes me as pandering to the worst sort of political correctness, the sort of political correctness that is basically based on not offending people at the sacrifice of truth. So that might be a controversial thing to say, but this is the thing. I don't see anything unreasonable at all about what Harper was suggesting, that people wanting to become Canadian citizens be asked to show their face. Now, to be fair, since this law was introduced, the vast majority of people, this has not been a problem. According to the Economist newspaper magazine in the UK, there's been two people who've refused to remove their niqab. So that to me indicates the policy's been successful. So I don't know why the left are attacking it. Um, there is another issue. Male jihadists can use a niqab as a cover. This is not inconceivable. Let's not forget last year the terrorist attack in Ottawa. Um, multiculturalism in itself is a good thing, but I think the Canadian left have to be very careful that they are not so adamant about this that they become outright naive. Canada is a sovereign nation, and there is a Canadian identity, there is a Canadian culture. If I was Canadian, I would feel a little bit irritated by the left's attitude to this. And I'm saying this as an outsider, but there's similar issues in the UK and in every other Western. So that's the only thing I would say about. Now, the reason I am focusing on that is because this has been called a major election issue, has been presented that way. So, you know, I would like to know Mr. Trudeau's stance on radical Islam. I would like to think that he recognizes it as a reality. I'm not going to, make any rash statements because I don't know enough about the man. But I think he was wrong on the Niqab issue. That's my opinion. I think Western countries should be tolerant, but I also think we should be not naive. And I think that, there's no honor in being so tolerant that you tolerate the intolerant. Now, it's true that some of the women who wear the niqab choose to, but there's many cultures around the world where they're forced to. It's a fact. I say cultures as opposed to Islam in general because that's not the case with Islam universally. But there are certainly cultures, especially Saudi Arabia, where it's an obligation. There's no choice in the matter. So for the Canadian left to chirp about Islamophobia strikes me as being very hypocritical, whilst at the same time preaching about women's rights. So that's the only issue I take with Trudeau so far. Um, on the other hand, if he shows more compassion, if the Canadian Conservative Party are anything like their British counterparts, then in that sense, the emergence of the left would be a good thing. I don't know if there's been Canadian austerity in the same way as we've had in Britain, but I mean, certainly he has a very strong mandate, so obviously he's popular. Um, another trivial thing, which people might find funny, but it looks like Canada has the world's two most famous Justins, Justin Bieber and Justin Trudeau. In fact, I can't think of any other famous Justins. Oh, well, Justin Timberlake, I guess. He's American, but there you go. Let me know your thoughts if you are Canadian. If you disagree with what I've said, feel free to say why. I'm happy to engage in civil debate. These are only my opinions, you don't have to agree. If you agree, then say so. I'd like to hear Canadian opinions because I've looked at my viewing figures from around the world, and it turns out the top five countries is the UK, the US, Canada, Australia, and Thailand. So if there are any Canadians watching this, please feel free to comment. Um, again, I'm an outsider. I don't mean it to offend anyone with this video, but Canada's a democracy. It's an open country. I'm sure people won't object to an outsider sharing a few thoughts. Thank you for watching.